I used to wonder if my story really mattered. Maybe you felt that too. Like your experience was too messy, too personal, or not far enough along to share. But here's what I've learned. Your story is your superpower. It's not just what you've been through, it's how you got through it. And when you know how to tell that story with purpose, you don't just inspire, you connect, you serve, and you start making the impact you were born to make. That's why I created Becoming a Storyteller and Creating Impact. It's a self-paced course to help you craft your story, speak with confidence, and start using your voice to truly make a difference. Whether you're a new coach, a speaker, or someone who just knows they were meant for more, this is your starting point. It's going to change how you see yourself and your story. Check out the link in the podcast notes and get registered today. Don't wait to make a difference. What if everything you've been running from, family, trauma, unhealed wounds, unimaginable loss, are actually the doorway to your greatest strength? Today's guest didn't just survive tragedy, he faced it head on, from breaking the cycles of generational pain to finding his son after he died by suicide, to receiving a stage 4 pancreatic cancer diagnosis. His story is one of staggering heartbreak, but even greater hope. Thank you so much for being here with me, Andy.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I genuinely appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Friends, welcome back to It's Your Story to Tell. I'm your host, Megan Babcock, and I'm really honored to have my guest, who is a resilient survivor and an inspirational author. We're going to just jump right in with him and allow him to share about his story all the way back, to childhood, where he experienced some pretty hard things. And we'll just let you go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, thank you. So I would say, like a lot of folks, I started with, my parents came from a very poor background, and it made a decision they didn't want to be poor anymore. So they threw themselves into work. And I'm thankful that they did that. We certainly have a better life 2 generations from then than we did or that we would have. However, with my mother working full-time, my father working and being on the road, what it really left was me. I have one half brother that's 8 years older than me, so I basically grew up alone, which left me open to being, in essence, groomed, influenced, and eventually sexually abused for a period of time. And, after that, your self-esteem changes, your view of yourself, your view of the world changes. I ended up being kind of a receiver of bullying and had some difficult circumstances, being assaulted that required surgeries, things like that. And so eventually, fast forward, my mother ended up with breast cancer. It had taken the lives of 3 of her sisters. It ended up taking her life as well, but she fought it for 11 years. Somewhere along the way, I got married. I had 4 children. I ended up diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer at the age of 53. And then about 2 years, I would say 3 years into my struggle with pancreatic cancer, my youngest son took his own life, and I found him after he took his own life. And so I would say, I guess, how have I kept going? One, I have at its foundation a religious belief that we are all valuable, and that we're all a thread, each individually a thread in the fabric of the universe, and that our lives matter and are important and shouldn't be thrown away or disregarded. So that influences me greatly. I looked back at my ancestors and I thought, well, they had a pretty difficult life. They didn't have toilet paper, women didn't have feminine products, or they didn't have indoor plumbing, and somehow they survived. So what could I learn from them? And I learned to encapsulate that into 6 words. I have 3 of those words each tattooed on my upper arm so I can see them a couple times a day in the mirror and remind myself. And then watching my mother, in essence, die over 11 years, I learned what the true meaning of perseverance, grit, and determination was. And so she definitely served as a role model for, pursuing life and doing all you can to make a better life. And that led me to jotting down these phrases that kind of became my 15 core beliefs. And to live those out, I had to kind of confront history, and I had to confront how I thought I had kept things in a box, only to learn through, talk therapy, CBT, EMDR, the emotion code, all these different mechanisms. I kind of learned that actually those those events, I didn't have them in a box, they had me in a box. So the way out was to confront them and face them.
Yeah, easier said than done. When we had our initial talk, there were many things with sexual abuse and that impacted my decisions, the way I thought about the world, how I saw myself. And it's a lot to unravel when you've got trauma after trauma kind of building upon that really flawed, unhealthy foundation. So you mentioned that you tried many different things from therapy and EMDR. Was there something that was really impactful? It really changed things?
I think it was. So, one of my core beliefs is only be religious about religion. And I think that phrase helps me remember to not box myself in with a dogma for how I could confront things. Like, I've been married 37 years this year. And so we've been through a lot of things. But in any relationship that long, you're going to have rough spots. And I was probably in my mid 40s the first time we went to like a marriage counselor. And it was just, like the pressure. We had 4 children at one point. We had 4 under 5 and under. We didn't have any family around. It was tremendously stressful. But in that marriage counseling, I ended up doing therapy really for the first time, like a talk therapy for the first time. And then, worked on some CBT things. And that was the first time that I realized that I catastrophized everything. But I really didn't know why I catastrophized things. Like, why was it always the worst possible outcome that I was guarding against? Things that would never occur, but I was absolutely guarded against them. And that was probably the first insight that I had that, hey, there's something, you're not seeing the world the way other people see the world. And I know I went to work for a company and everybody there was very positive and they were all going, and all I did was I saw like all the risk that was in everything. And I thought, man, I'd like to be more like these people. Why can't I get there? So you go through years of kind of, you think working on it, but maybe not really working on it. And paradoxically, when my son took his life, the pressure of that, it will expose all cracks and weaknesses. Like it just, and you have to make some choices. And during grief counseling, I heard about this technique called EMDR. Eye movement desensitization. Anyway, it's basically rapid eye movement desensitization. And so I found a therapist, wonderful lady, someone that I really came to trust. In therapy, it's really important that you have somebody that's not even inadvertently manipulating the situation for some outcome that they want, right? And so we found this lady and she helped me, my wife, my children. But during that time, she said, Andy, I think it's not just your son's suicide. We need to process that. We need to work through it. We need to get you to a place where you can think about him without having these visceral emotional reactions. And I knew it wasn't good when she started writing down topics that we would cover in EMDR. And it was on a legal page. And she turned the page and she kept writing. And she got to the bottom of the second page and she turned the page. I was like, hey, how much? And she goes, well, you got a lot of stuff. And I'm like, I don't really have that much stuff. Like, I don't know. Like, what are you writing down? But I think all of it kind of culminated there and kind of that pressure and kind of that broken place of after my son's suicide, I just didn't want to live the way I lived before, and I'd come to realize that, like I said, I didn't have all these things in a box. They had me in a box. And so I would say that's the point at which I kind of decided, look, if we're going to survive this and we're going to continue on, I don't want to continue on the way that I got here. And so that was kind of the beginning. And so then those EMDR sessions were really kind of the kickoff to confronting a lot of these things like the sexual abuse, which I thought was, I told somebody, they said, how do you deal with forgiveness? And I said, people always talk about forgiveness and they say you should forgive. But when that trauma, that memory, that thing that happens to us, when it still has its claws in us, like that's painful. And so I told somebody, it's like if you're being assaulted, you don't actually forgive the person while they're punching you in the face. That's like, it's impossible to do because you forgive them. They keep punching you in the face. Like it's not working out. And the people that always told me to forgive, I didn't know how to do that because I thought I had. But it wasn't until I went through the process of releasing that emotion that I could look back at the people who sexually abused me and forgive them as a final step in releasing me from that, right? Like the forgiveness really released me, but I couldn't release me from it until I could separate the emotion that was holding on to me. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like It's like this
Wow, that is
entangled
so
thing.
powerful. That was something definitely in my journey that I struggled with. I wanted to forgive, and I knew we're supposed to
Yeah.
forgive as believers, and then you get triggered.
Well,
Something
it's
brings
it's
that
worse.
up.
It's almost worse as a believer because you're like, well, Jesus forgave everybody. You can't forgive them. I'm like, well, actually, I thought I had, but I'm a little pissed off right now, honestly. And so
Yeah.
how can I forgive them when every time I think about the people or that situation, I become angry. I become hurt by it, and so nobody ever told me like how to do it. Like what? Like, hey, there's these steps you have to go through to get to forgiveness. And I was like, and nobody even told me that. It was just through the process after the EMDR pieces, which by the way is not fun. Okay, it's not like let's go to a amusement park and enjoy the day. It's not that. But once I was able to separate the emotional response from the memory, and I could just have the memory without the anger and the hurt and drawing me back to being some small defenseless child and all that stuff that comes along with sexual abuse, which is why it's such a heinous thing. And it was only then that I went so I could think about it and work my way through the process of forgiving was because the memory and the emotion didn't have its claws in me. It was kind of
Yeah.
profound for me.
Yeah, I had not thought of it in that way. I have done EMDR and other ways of processing traumatic things. And you're right. It is when you can make peace in your own body because our nervous system and the memory holds a connection to how we felt in the moment. And so going back there, it makes it very hard to be released from it. And so being able to go into that place, because that's what EMDR allows you to do in a way of hopefully not reliving it. That's not the idea is we don't want to relive it, but we want to go back into it and pull apart like you said, that memory and how you were experiencing it in your body because that gets stored, activated, and then everything comes rushing back. And so I just really love how you highlighted how impactful that was in being able to release you from the pain of it because the reason we do forgiveness is for ourselves. I'm just sitting here still in awe of that revelation of how important it is to be able to feel safe in your body, to be able to
Yeah.
be released from it. And it gave me just a whole nother perspective of thinking about the act of forgiveness and that you can't truly forgive until you can be truly healed in that place.
Yeah, I had no idea, right? Like I said, I just kind of stumbled into it one day and thought, wait a second, how am I able to not just say that I forgive them, but why am I not getting angry about this thing? Like, how did I get there? And then I thought, well, maybe it's because the memory's kind of been separated from the emotion. And if I'm not emotional about it, maybe that was the linchpin to forgiveness. I mean, yeah, you got to have a desire to want to forgive. I just think it's a combination of things that help us get to that place. Yeah, I don't think nobody wrote that down for me before that.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
think it would
what
have been much
you're saying
easier.
is it's a whole body. I mean, we're not just mind, body, and spirit, individually. Like everything is linked. And so you have to deal with all of the pieces in order to experience true freedom.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. Look, through my cancer struggle, I am a big believer in integrative medicine, like an integrative protocol to deal with cancer. Eastern and Western standard of care, and and other integrative approaches, and adjunct therapies, and like you bring everything. Just I
Mindset.
never
Like,
mindset, yeah, but I never thought about that in the process of one needs to have an integrative approach to find some level of peace. Forgiveness is key to finding that peace, but what do you do to forgive? Like it's this integrative approach. And so it's not that different from, I mean, it is, but like applying an integrative approach to emotional and mental and spiritual and physical, kind of you have to take all those components into consideration to be able to kind of make the whole thing a single thing, make these individual things a single thing. And I think that's kind of part of it too. It's like coming to a place, people will say, well, you need to get to a place where you're more whole. The hell does that mean? I don't like,
Exactly.
what does that mean? It's like, tell me to forgive people. I still like I thought I had. What do you mean I'm not whole? But I think part of that is it's like, well, you have to integrate all these pieces and they have to work together and they're not working together really well right now. And you can't get these other parts to work because this one gets angry every time that you think about this thing. And you cry every time that this happens. And so how are you? Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, all of these things that you're talking about are skills and tools to help increase our capacity and ability to go into those hard places. I know in my journey, I was trying to avoid going back into those places. I could just be more positive. I can just work harder. I could do, but I wasn't able to be. It was just, let me try to work this out. We won't deal with it. We'll just keep going. And that's for me where more and more trauma was happening in my life because you're not thinking clearly, you're reacting, and your subconscious programming versus being able to sit in the discomfort and make conscious choices. And for me, that was what I needed to learn. I needed to learn how to regulate my nervous system. I needed to use things like EMDR and all of these different techniques. I love the dialectical behavior therapy. You were talking about CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy. There's so many things out there. And for a long time in my journey, I was talking to people in the church. I had counseling and I wasn't really seeing the fruits. I had this desire, but I still felt so stuck. So if people are sitting in that stuck place, I just want you to know there's so many opportunities out there to try something different. And if something's not working, start researching, looking for other ways because there's not a one size fits all. And I didn't realize that because I was outsourcing it to everybody else to be the expert and tell me, like, what do I need to do? Just give me the boxes to check because I was really good at doing, but we weren't getting to the heart of the matter. And really, that's what you have to get to in order to have that true freedom. And to be able to forgive. There's a lot of people in my life that I was very disappointed by, but now I can look at it different. Kind of like you were saying, looking back at the generations and thinking, wow, this was the situation that my grandfather was in. We were actually talking about kind of some of our things where, like, my grandfather, his situation, he was wanted to lie about his age and get into the Marine Corps to avoid what he was going through. And
Hmm.
so you start looking back and then you have a lot more compassion for, wow, they were doing the best that they could do, and we harm people even with the best of intentions when we don't face the wounding.
Absolutely true. And I think one of the things, like I look back at prior generations, and I was angry at them for a long time because I thought there were better decisions that could have been made, and frankly, there were better decisions that could be made. Having said that, I've come to a realization that for most of those generations, there was no time to worry about your trauma. They were just trying to kill something or grow something to feed people. Like,
Survive.
set aside your personal needs and just survive. Okay. And so, to a certain extent, we have an opportunity that past generations didn't have if we choose to take on that work. And, if we were to believe in something like quantum entanglement, we would say that, look, if you deal with things today, not only are you changing the future, it might actually affect the past because all these things are connected in quantum entanglement. Whatever it is, we have the opportunity today to face these things. And we are if we make the decision to do that, and I think, look, I think if we make the decision to do that, we are choosing what we will pass to forward generations, right? We can out of respect for prior generations, take on that burden of making a course correction for future generations. And, I think one of the things when you were talking about, like the bad decisions we make, thinking, like, if we could just keep going forward, okay, fine, I put that in my past, I'm just going to keep moving forward. But you're not actually putting it in your past. It's still with you. And, I had a lot of bad behaviors along the way, and without getting into every detail. There were to numb the pain and to make myself feel better. I chased a lot of pleasures in this life, but ultimately, those pleasures, the pain remains, and the pleasures are temporary. So it's like, well, you can never enjoy enough stuff to get rid of this. To permanently cover it up so it eventually shows up, which is kind of rule number one. No one outruns the universe. Okay. The universe is designed a certain way. It works a certain way. You're not smarter than the universe. You don't have enough energy to get past it. As a matter of fact, fighting the universe is exhausting. Like that's one of the things when you were talking.
That is so true. I'm like, I was always so exhausted.
Yeah, it's like, well, that's because you're fighting the entire universe,
Right.
and it's like me
going
against
your design. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, no wonder I was exhausted, and at some point you're like, wow. So if I just kind of deal with this inside the guardrails that the universe is designed upon, I won't be as exhausted. Like maybe I should just go with the flow of the universe instead of fighting against the universe. And like I think, whether it's folks in the church, counselors, therapists, I think what you were talking, one of the things you said, we have a responsibility to be insatiably curious. And if someone is giving us advice, and like you said, it's like, well, I'm doing what you said, but I'm not feeling any better. Like it's not, then we should be curious to continue to seek, how do we get there? Because I think each of those, while sometimes not helpful, sometimes detrimental, sometimes moderately helpful, in each of those things that people have offered us, there is some kernel that we can take away from that. And if we put enough of those together, we can find an answer. We can find a path, maybe not an answer, but a path that will allow us some freedom from our history, because, history does not repeat itself. Humans repeat history, right? So we just keep doing the same thing over and again. It's like, see, history repeating itself. That's what my grandfather did. No, you just happen to be doing a lot of similar things to what your grandfather did. Okay. That's why history could have been completely different had you not made the same choices.
Good.
And, it's like, why are you blaming him? Okay. He screwed up.
Right.
Yeah, yes, he did. Why are you doing the same thing? And so, and I'm not saying like I take on all the burden for other people's decisions, but at some point we don't have to keep making the same errors.
Yeah. Well, you're just taking your own personal responsibility and saying, I can choose to do something different. And when we have a dream and a desire, like when I was sitting there and I was not getting the desired outcome, I had something that I was desiring. And I believe we're all gifted with a dream. And if you're not living it, there is a way towards it. And it is just a matter of a curiosity to find your path, because when we look to everybody else to figure it out for us, they don't have the same dream. They don't have the same gifting that's been placed inside of you. So people can help. They can maybe ask some good questions or share some wisdom. But if you're still not moving in the direction and you're still being pulled, then it's time to start looking. In part 2, we're going to have Andy share with us a little bit more about the book that he wrote and the principles that he has successfully used to guide his life to look more like the dream that he was imagining.